The best part about watching my supervisor panic wasn't the money, though that $285,000 offer didn't hurt. It wasn't even seeing her scramble to explain to the board why 8 major clients walked out in 6 weeks. The best part was knowing she'd brought it all on herself when she hit that delete button in front of 31 people. My name is Patrick Steele, I'm 48 years old, and 3 months ago I watched what I thought was my career get destroyed in about 30 seconds. Turns out, it was actually the beginning of the most satisfying revenge story you'll ever hear. But let me back up because this whole thing started way before Cameron Brooks decided to torch my work in that conference room. And trust me, you need the whole story to understand just how perfectly everything fell apart for her. 18 months ago, I took a job at Apex Industrial Solutions as Senior Operations Analyst. Look, I've been working in manufacturing and operations for 24 years. Started on the factory floor right out of high school at a steel plant in Ohio, worked my way up through quality control, logistics, plant management, the whole 9 yards. So when I saw this consulting job posting, I figured it'd be easy money. Help some industrial clients optimize their processes, maybe share some hard-earned wisdom, clock out at 5 p.m. for once. What they didn't mention in the job interview was that Apex was hemorrhaging clients faster than a busted hydraulic line. The guy before me lasted exactly 6 months before walking out. No notice, no transition, no documentation, just gone. And my new supervisor, Cameron Brooks, made it crystal clear from day one that she blamed operations people like me for the company's problems. Cameron was one of those MBA types who thought business was all about the numbers on spreadsheets. You know the kind. Never worked a day in actual operations, but could talk your ear off about efficiency metrics and key performance indicators. She had one of those corner offices with motivational posters about synergy and paradigm shifts. The idea that industrial clients might want to work with someone who actually understood their day-to-day challenges was completely foreign to her theoretical approach to everything. Here's the thing, though. When I started digging into our client files, I found exactly what I expected. Page after page of generic service reports that sounded like they'd been written by robots. No real understanding of how these companies actually operated. No indication that anyone at Apex had ever set foot in a manufacturing facility or talked to someone who had dirt under their fingernails. These weren't just any clients either. We're talking about Hudson Reeves, who ran Reeves Steel Fabrication, a company that employed 200 people and had been in business for 30 years. Wesley Porter's logistics operation, Porter Freight Solutions, moved cargo for half the construction companies in 3 states. Garrett Walsh ran Walsh Construction Group, building everything from shopping centers to industrial complexes. These guys knew their businesses inside and out, and they could spot consultant BS from a mile away. So I started doing something that apparently was revolutionary at Apex. I began treating these clients like the experienced professionals they were. When Hudson mentioned during a routine quarterly check-in that equipment downtime was killing his numbers, I didn't just log it as a complaint and move on to the next agenda item. I asked if I could come take a look. Cameron nearly choked on her coffee when I requested permission to visit a client site. We don't do field visits. That's inefficient use of billable hours. Handle it with a phone consultation. But I pushed back. Hudson's got $2 million worth of fabrication equipment. If we can solve his downtime problem, he'll probably double his contract with us. 3 days later, I'm walking through Hudson's facility in steel-toed boots and a hard hat, talking to his maintenance supervisor, looking at historical breakdown data, actually understanding what was going wrong. Here's what I found. Their preventive maintenance schedule was completely backwards for the type of heavy-duty equipment they were running. These weren't light manufacturing machines running 8-hour shifts. Hudson's operation ran 16-hour days, 6 days a week. They had hydraulic press brakes that were 15 years old but built like tanks, plasma-cutting tables that ran almost continuously, overhead cranes moving 5-ton steel beams all day long. The manufacturer's recommended maintenance schedule was designed for typical use, not the kind of industrial beating Hudson's equipment took. I spent 2 weeks developing a predictive maintenance protocol based on actual usage data, not textbook recommendations. Temperature monitoring on critical hydraulic components, vibration analysis on the big stamp presses, oil analysis schedules that matched their production cycles rather than arbitrary calendar dates. We installed $8,000 worth of monitoring equipment and retrained their maintenance crew. Results? Equipment downtime dropped 23% in the first quarter. That's real money we're talking about, $47,000 in avoided production losses. Hudson was so impressed he signed a 3-year extension and referred 2 other fabrication companies to us. When I presented the results to Cameron, you'd think she'd be celebrating. Instead, she pulled out her efficiency reports. Patrick, you spent 34 billable hours on this project. Standard protocol is 12 hours maximum for operational assessments. Why did you spend triple the allocated time? She didn't care about the $47,000 savings. She didn't care about the 3-year contract extension. She didn't care about the 2 referrals. All she saw were efficiency metrics that didn't fit her spreadsheet formulas. Look, Cameron, I said, Hudson's paying us $180,000 a year now instead of $60,000. Seems like a pretty good return on investment for those extra 22 hours. That's not how we measure performance here, she replied, making a note in her tablet. Billable hour optimization is our primary success metric. Right there, I should have known how this was going to end. Same thing happened with Wesley Porter's freight operation. Guy called me up about 3 weeks after the Hudson success, said he'd heard good things and wanted to talk about his logistics challenges. Wesley's problem was different, but just as real. Fuel costs were eating into his margins, delivery times were all over the map, and his drivers were working crazy overtime hours trying to meet deadlines. Standard Apex consulting response would have been to recommend some off-the-shelf route planning software package, charge him $25,000 for implementation, and call it a day. That's exactly what Cameron suggested when I brought up Wesley's situation during our weekly team meeting. Porter Freight is a straightforward logistics optimization case, she announced, clicking through her PowerPoint slides. We have 3 approved software solutions that address route efficiency, implementation time, 2 weeks, billable hours, 16 maximum. But I'd already spent an hour on the phone with Wesley, and I knew his problem wasn't something you could solve with generic software, so I asked if I could dig deeper. Patrick, Cameron sighed, we need to maintain consistent service delivery protocols. Client problems have standard solutions. That's how we scale efficiently. Here's the thing about working in operations for 24 years. You develop a nose for when something doesn't smell right. Wesley's fuel costs were up 40% year over year, but his delivery volume had only increased 12%. Those numbers don't add up unless there's a fundamental process problem somewhere. So I did what Cameron definitely didn't want me to do. I spent a week riding with Wesley's drivers, mapping actual traffic patterns, timing loading procedures, understanding where the real bottlenecks were. And let me tell you, sitting in a Peterbilt for 12 hours gives you a completely different perspective on logistics than staring at spreadsheets in an air-conditioned office. What I found was fascinating. The problem wasn't the routes at all. Wesley's drivers knew every shortcut, every traffic pattern, every loading dock from here to Memphis. They were good at their jobs. The problem was back at Wesley's main distribution facility. Here's what was happening. Trucks would show up for their morning loads, but they'd sit in the yard for 45 minutes on average waiting for warehouse staff to locate and stage the right freight. Not because the warehouse guys were lazy, they were busting their tails, but the way incoming freight was stored made it nearly impossible to access outbound shipments without moving everything else first. Picture this. A truck comes in Monday morning with mixed freight, some going to Nashville Tuesday, some to Atlanta, Wednesday, some to Birmingham. Friday, the warehouse crew stacks it all together in whatever bay has space. Tuesday morning, when the Nashville truck needs to load, they've got to move Atlanta and Birmingham freight just to get to the Nashville stuff. Then Wednesday, they move it all again for the Atlanta load. It was like one of those sliding puzzles where you've got to move 8 pieces just to get one where it needs to go. I designed a cross-docking system that reorganized how incoming freight was staged based on outbound delivery priorities. Instead of storing everything together, we created dedicated staging areas for each delivery route. Incoming freight got sorted immediately based on where and when it was going out. Cost to implement? About $12,000 in warehouse layout changes, new shelving systems, floor markings, a simple tracking system. I worked with Wesley's warehouse supervisor to retrain the crew on the new procedures, which took about a week. Results were immediate. Average loading time dropped from 45 minutes to 12 minutes. Drivers were hitting the road earlier, making deliveries faster, getting home at reasonable hours. Fuel costs went down $18,000 per month because trucks weren't sitting idle burning diesel while waiting to load. Wesley was so happy he gave me a bottle of bourbon and recommended us to 3 other logistics companies. More importantly, he tripled his contract with Apex, from $80,000 annually to $240,000. When I presented these results to Cameron, I thought maybe she'd finally understand what I was trying to accomplish. Instead, she focused on the fact that I'd spent 52 billable hours on what she'd allocated 16 hours for. "This is exactly what I'm talking about, Patrick," she said, pulling up her efficiency dashboard on her laptop. "You're consistently overspending time on projects. Yes, the client is satisfied, but we're not optimizing our resource allocation." "Cameron, we just turned an $80,000 client into a $240,000 client. That's a 200% revenue increase, plus 3 referrals. Doesn't that matter?" "What matters is scalable processes," she replied. "If every analyst spent 52 hours on every project, we'd never be profitable. We need consistent, efficient service delivery." That's when I realized Cameron and I were living in completely different worlds. She saw client work as a production line where you standardize everything and measure success by how quickly you can process requests. I saw it as problem solving where you figure out what's actually wrong and fix it properly, even if it takes longer than your spreadsheet says it should. The third major win came with Garrett Walsh's construction operation. Garrett had been an Apex client for 2 years, but he was getting frustrated with what he called consultant runaround. His project timelines were consistently running over schedule, which in construction means penalty clauses, lost bonuses, and seriously unhappy customers. Previous Apex analysts had given Garrett generic project management advice: better scheduling software, daily progress, reports, milestone tracking systems. None of it addressed his real problem, which became obvious the minute I visited one of his job sites. Garrett's crews were skilled and experienced. His project managers knew construction inside and out, but they were constantly waiting on materials, equipment, or subcontractors, not because of poor planning, but because of resource allocation conflicts between multiple simultaneous projects. Here's what was happening. Garrett would have 3 projects running at once, say a shopping center, an office building, and a warehouse. Each project manager would schedule concrete pours, crane time, or electrical subcontractors based on their individual project needs. But they weren't coordinating with each other, so Project A would book the crane for Tuesday, Project B would book it for Wednesday, but then Project A would hit a weather delay and need to push their pour to Wednesday too. Now you've got 2 project managers fighting over the same crane, and one project falls behind schedule. I developed a centralized resource allocation system that treated all of Garrett's active projects as a single, integrated operation. Instead of each project manager competing for resources, they had shared visibility into what equipment, materials, and subcontractors were available when. The system wasn't rocket science, just common sense applied to construction logistics. Instead of 3 separate schedules competing against each other, we created one master schedule that optimized resources across all active projects. If the crane was available Tuesday but Project A had weather concerns, we'd automatically shift Project B's concrete pour to Tuesday and keep Project A flexible for Wednesday or Thursday. Implementation took about a month, working with Garrett's project managers to integrate the new scheduling approach. Results were dramatic. Project completion times improved by an average of 18%, which in construction translates to serious money. Early completion bonuses, avoided penalty clauses, ability to take on more projects because crews weren't sitting around waiting for resources. Garrett's annual contract went from $120,000 to $380,000. He referred 4 other construction companies to us, including 2 major commercial builders. But when I presented these results to Cameron, you can guess what happened. "Patrick, you spent 87 billable hours on this project. Our construction consulting protocol allocates 24 hours maximum. This is becoming a pattern of resource mismanagement. 87 hours to generate $260,000 in additional annual revenue, plus 4 major referrals. In any sane business world, that's called a home run. But Cameron was living in efficiency metric land where hours mattered more than results. "Look," I said, "maybe we need to rethink how we measure success here. Our client retention rate is up 43% since I started taking this detailed approach. Revenue per client has doubled. Customer satisfaction scores are the highest they've been in company history." "What we need," Cameron replied, "is consistent service delivery that can scale across our entire analyst team. Your methods are too time-intensive and too dependent on individual expertise. We need standardized solutions." That's when I realized this wasn't really about efficiency or scalability. This was about control. Cameron had built her management philosophy around the idea that business problems had standard solutions that could be applied consistently by anyone with basic training. The notion that some problems required deep expertise, extensive analysis, and customized solutions threatened everything she believed about how consulting should work. But here's what she didn't understand. Industrial clients don't have standard problems. A steel fabrication company, a freight operation, and a construction firm might all have efficiency issues, but the solutions are completely different because the underlying operations are completely different. You can't fix a hydraulic press brake with route optimization software. Over the next several months, our fundamental disagreement kept escalating. Cameron would assign me projects with strict hour limitations. I'd exceed those limitations because the actual problems were more complex than her standard protocols assumed. She'd document my inefficiency. I'd deliver exceptional results that generated significant additional revenue. Rinse and repeat. The breaking point came during our annual strategic planning meeting in late October. Our CEO, Edmund Hayes, was reviewing departmental performance when he mentioned that client retention had reached an all-time high and revenue per client had increased 67% year over year. Whatever we're doing in client services, we need to expand it across other divisions, Edmund announced. Our hands-on approach to understanding client operations is clearly resonating with industrial companies who are tired of generic consulting advice. I watched Cameron's face during Edmund's praise. You could see her internal struggle. The success metrics were undeniable, but they validated everything she'd been trying to stop me from doing. After the meeting, she cornered me near the elevator. "I want to see all your client documentation," she said. "Every analysis, every report, every hour you've spent on projects over the past 18 months. I'm conducting a comprehensive audit of our service delivery methods." It was clearly intended as punishment. Hundreds of hours of bureaucratic busywork that would pull me away from actual client work. But I approached the audit project the same way I approached everything else, methodically and thoroughly. I spent 3 weeks compiling everything: client assessments, operational analyses, implementation reports, results documentation. The finished audit was 73 pages of proof that detailed technical analysis was directly responsible for over $420,000 in additional annual revenue and a client retention rate that had improved from 62% to 89%. Every hour I'd overspent on projects had generated measurable business value that our competitors couldn't replicate with their standardized approaches. Every inefficient site visit had resulted in solutions that fundamentally improved how our clients operated their businesses. I was actually proud of that audit. It represented 18 months of genuine problem solving that had transformed relationships with some of the most demanding industrial clients in our region, which made what happened next feel like a punch in the gut. Cameron scheduled an all-hands department meeting for a Tuesday morning in early December. She announced that we needed to realign our service delivery protocols, and that my audit would serve as a case study for discussion. I figured she was finally ready to acknowledge that detailed analysis was driving our improved performance, maybe even expand the approach to other analysts. Instead, she had me display my audit files on the main conference room screen while all 31 members of our department watched. Then she began systematically tearing apart every detailed analysis, every extended site visit, every customized solution, as examples of resource misallocation and process inefficiency. "This is exactly what we need to eliminate," she declared, scrolling through months of careful documentation. "Excessive technical analysis creates unrealistic client expectations and unsustainable service delivery models. These files represent a fundamental misunderstanding of scalable consulting practices." I felt my face getting hot as my co-workers watched her turn my greatest professional accomplishments into a cautionary tale. She was presenting $420,000 in additional revenue and a 27-point improvement in client retention as evidence of what not to do. But then she did something that crossed every line of professional decency. She opened my complete audit database, every client analysis, every operational assessment, every process improvement that proved detailed technical work was the foundation of our business success. Her cursor moved toward the delete option. "This entire methodology is garbage," she announced to the room. "Starting today, we return to efficient, standardized consulting protocols that can be executed consistently across our entire team." And she clicked delete. I watched 18 months of work disappear from the screen. 73 pages of documented success, gone in one vindictive click. The conference room was dead silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and someone's pen clicking nervously. You could feel the tension radiating off every person in that room. Even Cameron's biggest supporters looked uncomfortable with what they'd just witnessed. Cameron turned away from the screen with this satisfied smile, clearly expecting me to accept the humiliation and start rebuilding my work according to her efficient protocols. But she'd made one massive miscalculation. While she was destroying my documentation, she hadn't destroyed the actual relationships I'd built with our clients. Hudson still had his predictive maintenance system running. Wesley's cross-docking operation was still saving him $18,000 a month. Garrett's resource allocation system was still keeping his projects on schedule and under budget. Those operational improvements existed in their facilities and their bottom lines, not in our computer files. And apparently, some of those relationships had been paying closer attention to our company dynamics than anyone realized. My phone started buzzing in my pocket before Cameron finished explaining her new streamlined service protocols. The caller ID showed Sterling Operations Group, a consulting firm that 3 senior analysts had started after leaving Morrison Industrial last year. I stepped out of the conference room to take the call, my hands still shaking from watching 18 months of work get erased in front of my colleagues. "Patrick," said the voice on the other end, "this is Alan Sterling. We've been tracking what's happening at Apex, and we think it's time we talked." The conversation that followed changed everything. Sterling Operations had been monitoring our client retention improvements for months. They knew exactly who was responsible for the operational solutions keeping major industrial accounts satisfied. They'd been planning to approach me, but watching Cameron destroy my audit files convinced them the timing was perfect. "We're prepared to offer you $285,000 annually to join our team," Alan said, "plus profit sharing and complete autonomy over technical consulting strategies. We believe detailed operational analysis is the future of industrial consulting, and we want you to build that future with us." $285,000. Nearly triple my current salary, working for people who valued exactly what Cameron considered wasteful inefficiency. But the best part of their offer wasn't the money. "We know you can't bring proprietary information from Apex," Alan continued, "but we also know that operational expertise comes from experience and problem-solving capability, not database files. If you join us and clients choose to work with someone who can actually solve their problems rather than someone who treats them like efficiency metrics, that's just market forces at work." I understood immediately. They weren't asking me to steal clients or violate any agreements. They were pointing out that if I left Apex and clients decided they preferred working with someone who understood their operations, that was their choice to make. When I walked back into the conference room, Cameron was still lecturing about standardized service delivery while my coworkers stared at their notebooks, clearly uncomfortable with what they'd witnessed. She noticed my return and paused her presentation. "Do you have questions about our new protocols, Patrick?" I looked around the room at people I'd worked alongside for 18 months, then at the blank screen where my audit had been displayed before being destroyed, then back at Cameron's expectant expression. "Actually," I said, "I have an announcement to make. I'm resigning from Apex Industrial Solutions, effective immediately. I'll be joining Sterling Operations Group as Director of Technical Consulting." The room went dead silent. Cameron's expression shifted from smug satisfaction to confusion, then something that looked like panic. "You can't just quit in the middle of a department meeting," she stammered. "There are protocols, transition procedures, notice requirements." "Actually," I replied, pulling out my phone to show the contract offer, "my employment agreement allows immediate resignation in cases of hostile work environment. Having my work publicly destroyed while being humiliated in front of colleagues qualifies." Edmund Hayes, who'd been quietly observing, stepped forward. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately before any hasty decisions." But I was done with private discussions. Cameron had chosen to humiliate me publicly so she could experience the consequences the same way. "There's nothing to discuss," I said, gathering my personal items. "My decision is final." As I headed for the door, Cameron called after me, her voice higher than usual. "You're making a huge mistake. Sterling Operations is a startup with no track record. You're throwing away job security for some fantasy about technical analysis." I paused and turned back. "We'll see which approach proves more valuable." Within 48 hours, I'd cleaned out my office and started at Sterling Operations. Their facility was smaller than Apex's, but filled with energy about building something innovative in industrial consulting. More importantly, I was finally working with people who understood that operational success came from solving real problems, not processing service requests efficiently. The validation of my decision came faster than I'd imagined. I didn't reach out to any Apex clients. I simply updated my professional profiles and continued being the same person who'd spent 18 months developing genuine solutions for industrial companies. The first call came Thursday morning. Hudson Reeves called my new direct line. "Patrick, heard through the network you've moved firms. Wanted to congratulate you and discuss Sterling's technical capabilities." We talked for 2 hours about his operational needs and expansion plans. Yes, the predictive maintenance system was still saving him money every month. By conversation's end, he'd scheduled a meeting to discuss transitioning his account. The second call came Friday afternoon. Wesley Porter wanted to explore working with someone who actually understood logistics operations instead of trying to sell software solutions. By my first week's end at Sterling Operations, I'd received calls from 7 former Apex clients, not because I'd solicited them, but because they preferred working with someone who could solve their actual operational challenges. Meanwhile, Cameron was discovering what she'd actually deleted. Through professional network contacts, I heard about her growing panic as she tried maintaining relationships with clients who were no longer interested in efficient service that didn't address their real problems. When she called Hudson for his routine quarterly review, he politely informed her he was exploring other options. When she contacted Wesley about upcoming projects, he explained he'd found a partner who better understood his operational requirements. 6 months later, Sterling Operations had grown 200% based largely on industrial clients who'd followed me from Apex. I was promoted to senior partner with equity participation. Apex Industrial Solutions, they laid off 40% of their staff and merged with a larger firm to survive. Cameron wasn't retained. Today I'm running technical consulting for one of the region's fastest-growing industrial firms. Every day I solve real operational problems for companies who appreciate working with someone who understands their challenges. Sometimes the best revenge is just letting people experience the natural consequences of their own terrible decisions while you build something better elsewhere. You know what I tell younger engineers now? Your work speaks louder than any PowerPoint presentation ever will. When you solve real problems for real people, they remember. And when someone tries to erase that history, they're only erasing their own credibility. Cameron learned the hard way that in industrial consulting, reputation isn't built on efficiency metrics. It's built on results that show up in your client's bottom line, month after month, long after the meetings are over.